So since coming back to Cleveland in '99, the Browns were really giving nothing to work with at first, and they were kind of the laughingstock of the league ever since, finding new embarrassing ways to lose, and they even had refs inventing new rules to make them lose. Everyone of course knows that they've used a new QB and coach almost every season over the last 2 decades, and really, it wasn't until about 3 years ago for things to finally start to take a turn.
Chance to see what Baker Mayfield's going to do. Here's one. It is caught by Landry to the 1. Little trick play and a throw to Baker Mayfield to tie the game.
In this video, I'm going to start things off in 2015 because in 14 they went 7-9, and after this season is when things really went downhill. Starting off, we all know the story of how Johnny Manziel was drafted into town and what happened after that, thanks to his new Netflix documentary, but this was only the start of the Browns becoming the joke of the league. Manziel had so much hype and was even on billboards, only to lose interest in football and even in his life very quickly. But yeah, Manziel started out the season poorly, and during this time, one of the only bright spots of the team was Josh Gordon, who was putting up historic franchise numbers, but he failed his drug test of course, banning him from the league for a year, and Kyle Shanahan left the organization. Moving to the next year, 2016 was somehow even worse than 15, but the optimism that was blooming before the season was something remarkable. We can start out by looking at what has happened with the city of Cleveland as a whole in terms of sports. The Cleveland Cavaliers beat the Golden State Warriors in the NBA Finals in a 3-1 comeback. The city was on cloud 9 in terms of sports, and it was no longer the laughingstock of the world. Starting with the Robert Griffin III injury in the first game of the season against the Eagles, the team was not off to a hot start, and the defense made Carson Wentz look like Tom Brady in a horrendous start. In weeks 2 and 3, the team controlled their own destiny in both games, but of course found ways to lose. But fans had a reason to be slightly optimistic because they were hanging with good teams. After this though, the season completely fell apart, and the Browns couldn't win to save their own lives. It was so embarrassing. But against the Chargers on Christmas Eve, they gave fans a moral victory with a 20-17 win over the Chargers off a missed field goal with time expiring. And I remember this win pretty vividly. Even with this record, Hugh Jackson remained the Browns coach because they were just switching every single year before this, and they had to try something else. Moving on, 2017 was of course an iconic year with so many lowlights and memories. Like, I'm not even sure how a team of professional athletes can be so bad. It was the worst roster and coaching staff in the league, all in one team. I was just watching lowlights of this season the other day for fun, and man, they were just awful. Kaiser threw the ball to the other team more than he did his own, and the Browns finally accomplished having a perfect season to join the Lions, and they got to celebrate with a big parade after the season. And if anyone ever questions the loyalty of Cleveland fans, just take a look at this moment right here. Alright, now moving on to 2018, this is when things finally started to head in an upward direction for this franchise. Somehow Hugh Jackson was still the coach of this team. Also, Hall of Fame left tackle Joe Thomas retired. But the Browns brought in Jarvis Landry from Miami, which was a very exciting move, and they drafted Baker Mayfield and Denzel Ward. So they finally had a young core, and if you remembered from Hard Knocks, Landry was the reason this team started to turn around. He was a leader, and really was the first person ever to start holding guys accountable. Also, Tyrod Taylor was the QB to start off the season, and the Browns did the impossible in week 1 to start out the year against the Steelers. The game was in terrible sloppy conditions, and they tied. They didn't lose, starting the season off 0-1. And Browns fans already had playoff scenarios in their mind. I'm just kidding, only the super diehard, unrealistic ones. But you can definitely tell that the energy was starting to shift, and just maybe this team wouldn't be an embarrassment anymore. And facing off against the Jets in week 3 in a primetime game, Tyrod Taylor got hurt, and that is the moment that the legendary run of Baker Mayfield began. He came out slinging the rock, and he gave First Energy Stadium a type of energy that they have never felt before. Picking Baker was kind of bittersweet for Cleveland fans at first because of how he planted the flag at Ohio State, but everyone quickly forgave him and hopped on the bandwagon, and he had a record-setting rookie year where the Browns as a team had playoff hopes late into the season. It was actually crazy how they went from 0-16 to becoming an emerging team just like that. And also, one guy I haven't talked about yet that I want to just mention is David Njoku, because he was on the team this whole time, and he of course became a big factor for this team later on. Nick Chubb also is somebody I somehow forgot to mention. He was drafted before this season and showed glimpses of his talent early on. Anyways, the 2019 offseason is when the hype train really started to build. The world was struck by the news that OBJ was going to come team up with his buddy Jarvis Landry, and that trade had Browns fans on cloud 9. But real life hit fast, and the Browns started off the year by getting whooped by Tennessee, and from there, things just never got going. Just when we all thought this team was a Super Bowl contender, they didn't even make the playoffs with a 6-10 record. But the following season in 2020, they completely flipped the script. Kevin Stefanski put himself on the scene, becoming one of the best offensive minds in football, and Baker picked his game up, and OBJ and Landry both had decent seasons, and Nick Chubb of course became a star. And this was the first year where the Browns were starting to pick up some signature wins, and the call by Jim Donovan when they clinched the playoffs was so surreal. And speaking of the playoffs, they went on the road to Pittsburgh in the wildcard game, and it was just storybook for Browns fans. Starting off with a snap over Big Ben's head, with the ball rolling into the end zone for a touchdown to start the game off 7-0. And after this, it was just complete domination, and the defense forced so many turnovers. And then the Browns went into Arrowhead against the Chiefs and put up a great fight. And this is a game I wish I could forget, but man, they should have won. It just ultimately came down to that missed targeting before halftime, and Baker's inability to put together a game-winning drive when it mattered most. It was just heartbreaking, but the team still made everyone proud, and people were so pumped for 2021. And honestly, I just want to skip over that year. It's not one I want to talk about. But Baker really struggled after playing through a shoulder injury, and then the OBJ drama started to kick in. Basically, things were kind of a mess, and the Browns made a big splash the following offseason, deciding to trade away Baker for Deshaun Watson. And looking back at this move, I still think it was one that the organization had to make. Baker probably needed the fresh start, and Watson was really the only talented guy this team could get. But he was of course suspended at the start of the 2022 season, so Jacoby Brissett led the offense at first. And honestly, he wasn't bad at all. But the Browns didn't have the best record, and by the time Watson had the keys to the offense, the season was pretty much over. And he was very, very rusty. So coming into this current season, I think people had expectations, but at the same time, nobody knew what to expect at all. They had a pretty good receiving core, led by Amari Cooper, who they traded for the previous season, of course from Dallas, and they also brought in Elijah Moore from the Jets, and they also brought in guys like Marquise Goodwin, who is known for his speed, and it was clear he was going to be a much better option than Anthony Schwartz. And also, the O-line was completely stacked, and the running back room was as well, of course led by Nick Chubb. And in week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals, they absolutely dominated, and this time it felt for real. The defense looked like it was going to be special, led by Jim Schwartz, who was a completely different guy than Joe Woods, who is another guy we can just forget about. And this team was playing with some swagger. But of course, as the common theme with Cleveland sports, nothing good lasts for a long time, and Nick Chubb had a very serious and scary season-ending injury on a dirty hit by Minkah Fitzpatrick, and it kind of sucked the life out of this team for a bit, because he truly was the heart and soul. But the Browns bounced back from this, and in all honesty, Jerome Ford really learned from Nick, and you could barely tell he was out. Obviously you can't replace Nick, but you get what I'm trying to say. Ford has done a terrific job of filling the hole. And also, the injuries most definitely didn't stop there. The team got ridiculously depleted and hit with injuries, so much to the point where over 25% of the roster were out to season enders. What was happening was almost impossible, but credit to Stefanski, the team stuck together and were so resilient all year. And when Watson was ruled out for the year after that Ravens win, the Browns of course signed Joe Flacco to the practice squad, and at the time, nobody really thought much of the move. We all thought he was going to be a veteran that could coach up some of the young QBs on the sideline, but it turned out he still had some Flacco magic left in the tank, and watching him has just been so surreal. And since the Browns got him, they have become one of the best offenses in the whole league, and combining that with the defense they have been scary good and so much fun to watch. And they just recently clinched the playoffs, and man, can you imagine if this dude beats the Ravens in Baltimore to finish off his career? Man, I just got chills just thinking about it.